still trying to get rich. The words weren't loud, they didn't need to be. Kyle said them with a smile, the kind that looks friendly if you don't listen too closely. His fork paused in midair, turkey glistening under the dining room lights, as if he'd just remembered a joke too good to keep to himself. I felt it before I understood it. That sudden, hollow drop in my chest. We were halfway through Christmas dinner, the kind you're supposed to remember fondly later. Soft music playing in the background, the smell of rosemary and butter still hanging in the air, wrapping paper stuffed into trash bags by the door. The grandchildren already bored with their new toys. I had said casually, carelessly, that I'd been busy lately, that I was working on something online. Nothing dramatic, just a sentence. Just honesty. Kyle leaned back in his chair and laughed. Come on, he said, waving his hand at me like he was brushing away smoke. At your age, still chasing money. At your age, the table went quiet in that specific way. Families go quiet when no one wants to admit something uncomfortable just happened. My daughter Melissa kept her eyes on her plate. She smiled faintly. Like this was all harmless teasing. I waited for her to say something. She didn't. Kyle wasn't finished. I mean, no offense, he added, which is usually the warning that offense is exactly what's coming. But shouldn't you be slowing down by now? Enjoying life instead of stressing yourself out with these ideas. I looked down at my hands resting in my lap. They were steady. That surprised me. Years ago, a comment like that would have made my voice shake, my cheeks burn. Now I just felt tired. I enjoy working, I said quietly. Kyle chuckled again. Sure, but how's that little online thing actually going? Made your first dollar yet? The words landed harder than he knew, or maybe harder than he cared. Little online thing I had learned over the past few years that people don't always mock you because they think you'll fail. Sometimes they mock you because it reassures them that they're safe staying exactly where they are still. The sting was real. I glanced at the laptop bag resting against the wall near the door. Old, scuffed, the same one. Kyle had once joked made me look like I was playing business. I remembered that moment clearly. How everyone laughed. How I laughed too, pretending it didn't matter. Across the table, my grandson dropped his fork, breaking the tension for a second. Melissa leaned over to help him. Still not looking at me? That hurt more than Kyle's words. Because strangers mocking McHugh. Because strangers mocking. You is one thing. Family, watching and saying nothing is another. Kyle lifted his glass. Relax, he said, smiling at me again. You've done enough. Let the young people handle ambition, young people. I smiled back. It was automatic. A reflex built from decades of swallowing comments like that whole. Excuse me, I said softly, standing up. I'll check on dessert. As I walked toward the kitchen, my heart started beating faster, like it had only just realized it was allowed to react. I pressed my palms against the counter and stared at the dark window. Above the sink, my reflection stared back at me. 50-4 years old. Widowed, supposedly. Past my prime. I thought about the nights I stayed up teaching. Myself, things no one thought I could understand. The mornings I woke up afraid, wondering if I was being foolish. Wondering if Kyle was right. I had never told them how hard it was. How lonely it felt to start over when everyone assumed you were winding down. I picked up the pie server and took a breath. When I returned to the table, the conversation had moved on. Sports, work complaints, mortgage rates. As if nothing had happened. Kyle didn't apologize. Melissa didn't meet my eyes. I served dessert, passed plates, smiled when the kids asked for extra whipped cream, and something inside me shifted. Not anger, not yet. Just a quiet, steady realization they had already decided who I was, what I was worth, what I was capable of. And tonight, without meaning to, Kyle had said it out loud. I sat back down, folded my hands, and listened. Because sometimes the moment people stop taking you seriously is the moment you finally see them clearly. Asterisk. They didn't wake up one day and decide I was finished. It happened slowly, quietly, in small comments stacked on top of each other until they formed a story. Everyone believed, including me. For a while after my husband died, people spoke to me differently, slower, softer, like I might break if they used the wrong tone. After I left my job, they stopped asking what I was working on and started asking if I was okay. That question, "Are you okay?" followed me everywhere. It wasn't concern, it was conclusion. Kyle came into the family a year after the funeral, confident, loud, the kind of man who filled space easily. From the beginning, he treated me like part of the furniture. Polite, but fixed. Something you didn't expect to change. When I talked about learning new things, he'd smile indulgently. "That's great," he'd say. "Keeps you busy." Busy dot, as if my life was something to be filled so it didn't echo. Melissa started doing it too, though I don't think she realized it. She'd explain technology to me before I asked. She'd insist on driving me places I'd driven myself for decades. She'd remind me of appointments I never forgot. They weren't trying to be cruel, they were trying to be helpful. And that's what made it so dangerous. Because when people decide you need help, they stop seeing what you're capable of. They stop listening. They stop imagining you as someone with a future instead of a past. I stopped correcting them. That was my mistake. Silence is easy too. It's been misinterpreted. They didn't see the evenings I spent hunched over my laptop. Frustration turning into stubborn determination. They didn't hear me muttering at the screen, writing things down, starting over when something didn't work. They didn't see the spreadsheets, the drafts, the failures. They didn't see the fear either. The fear that maybe Kyle was right, that maybe ambition did have an expiration date, that maybe wanting more at this stage of life was embarrassing. I worked through that fear alone, and slowly, so slowly, may build something real, but to my family. I was still the woman who needed help carrying groceries, the woman who should be careful not to overdo it, the woman whose projects were hobbies at best. Kyle once asked me, laughing, if I needed him to set parental controls on my computer. Everyone laughed. I laughed too. That's the thing people don't understand. You don't always defend yourself when you're underestimated. Sometimes you just take notes. Every dismissive comment went somewhere. Every joke lodged itself in my memory. Not to punish them, but to remind myself why I kept going on the far. I kept going on the days I wanted to quit. Because no one expects much from you when they think your best years are behind you. And that gives you freedom. Freedom to work without interruption. Freedom to fail privately. Freedom to succeed quietly. By the time Christmas came, I had crossed a line they didn't even know existed. My little online thing was no longer an idea. It was structured, stable, growing. I hadn't told them. Not because I was hiding, because I was tired of explaining myself to people who had already made up their minds at the dinner table. When Kyle laughed, he wasn't reacting to reality. He was reacting to the version of me he'd invented. The harmless one, the declining one, the woman whose ambition was supposed to fade politely. And for the first time, instead of shrinking under that version, I felt something else rise up. Clarity. They didn't know me anymore. And maybe they never really had be. They never really had the television turned on by accident, at least. That's what it looked like. One of the kids grabbed the remote, bored with adult conversation, flipping channels without really watching. The screen flickered, voices overlapping for a second, and then everything settled. Local entrepreneur. I froze, not outwardly, just inside. Kyle was mid-sentence. Something about interest rates and how people should know when to quit chasing unrealistic goals. His voice drifted off as the reporter continued. Built an online education platform serving thousands. My heart started pounding. Hard enough that I wondered if anyone else could hear it. I didn't move. The room shifted before anyone spoke. Chairs creaked. Forks stopped clinking. The casual noise of dinner evaporated. Kyle frowned at the television. Hey, wait, the screen showed a familiar home office. My home office. The small bookshelf by the window. The framed photo I kept turned slightly away from the camera, the lamp I'd bought secondhand, because it gave good light for recording, and then my face filled the screen. Older than some Oriel now, calmer, focused. The reporter smiled. Margaret Lawson, 54, turned a late-life career setback into a thriving digital business. Kyle's fork slipped from his fingers and clattered against his plate. Melissa's sharp intake of breath sounded almost loud in the silence. I watched the screen like I was watching someone else's life. The words flowed easily now, polished by editing and rehearsed answers. Now reaching students in more than 40 countries. 40. Kyle looked at me then. Really looked at me? His mouth opened slightly, like he was searching for the right reaction and couldn't find one. "That's you," he said. It wasn't a question. I took a sip of water before answering. I wanted my voice steady. "Yes," I said. "It is." The room went completely still. No one laughed. No one interrupted. The reporter kept talking. Numbers, growth, plans for expansion. Phrases I'd practiced saying without apologizing for them. Melissa's face had gone pale. She kept glancing between me and the screen like she was trying to reconcile two versions of the same person. Kyle swallowed. You've never said anything?" I tilted my head slightly. "You never asked." That landed. The reporter asked a question I remembered well. "What advice would you give others starting later in life?" On screen, me smiled. "Don't let anyone convince you that your best years are behind you." I felt that line echo through my chest. Kyle shifted in his chair. The confidence he'd carried all evening drained out of him, replaced by something like calculation. I'd seen that look before when he was reassessing a situation, figuring out where he stood. Melissa finally spoke. "Mom, why didn't you tell us?" I considered her carefully before answering, because when you're used to being dismissed, you learn to keep good news to yourself until it's strong enough to stand alone. But I didn't say that. I didn't think it mattered. I said instead, the interview ended with footage of my workspace. The certificates on the wall, the thank you notes pinned to corkboard. Proof I'd never needed to show them before. The TV clicked to the next program. The silence lingered. Kyle cleared his throat. "Well, that's impressive." Impressive. The same man who'd laughed 10 minutes earlier now chose his words carefully. Like the ground beneath him had shifted, and he wasn't sure where it was safe to stand. Melissa reached for her wine glass, her hands shaking slightly. I had no idea. I smiled faintly. Not triumphant. Not smug. Just tired. "Anyone want dessert?" I asked. It was such a normal question that it seemed to confuse them. Kyle nodded automatically. The kids perked up as I cut the pie. I felt something settle into place. Nothing dramatic had happened. No speeches. No confrontation. And yet, everything had changed. Because once people see you differently, they can't unsee it. And for the first time that night, Kyle looked at me like someone whose approval he wasn't sure he had. Any more asterisk, the first call came the next morning. I was still in my robe. Coffee cooling on the counter. The house quiet in that peaceful way it never felt when company was around. My phone buzzed, and before I even looked at the screen, I knew who it would be. Melissa Dodd. Her voice was careful, almost rehearsed. "Mom, I've been thinking about last night." Of course she had. She talked about Kyle's sense of humor, about how he hadn't meant to be disrespectful, about how surprised she was, how proud. Proud was a new word in her vocabulary when it came to me. "I just wish you'd told us," she said softly. "We're family." I stared out the window at the bare winter trees. Family, that word had a way of being flexible when it needed to be. I didn't think it would change anything. I replied. There was a pause. Not long, but noticeable. "Well," she said, "I guess it kinda does." The next call was Kyle's. His tone was completely different from the manhood. Laughed at the dinner table. Smoother, more respectful, almost eager. "Maggie," he said, as if we were old friends. "I just wanted to say how impressive everything is. Really? You've done something incredible." I waited. I've been thinking, he continued. And with success like that, things can get complicated. Taxes, investments. You don't want to get taken advantage of. There it was, concern disguised as opportunity. I've managed just fine so far. I said, "Oh, I'm sure," he replied quickly. "I just meant sometimes it helps to have family involved. People you can trust." Trust. The word sat between us, heavy and ironic. After that, the invitations started. Dinner again soon. Just us. Coffee dates. Casual suggestions. We'd talk about the future. The tone had changed, but the assumption hadn't. They weren't asking if I needed help. They were deciding how they would help, how they would be included. What they didn't realize was that my success hadn't made me more vulnerable. It had made me clearer. I noticed how Kyle listened more closely now, how he stopped interrupting, how he laughed less and calculated more. I noticed how Melissa suddenly asked about my schedule, my plans, whether I'd thought about long-term arrangements. Not once did either of them ask how I felt. Not really. They were adjusting to a new version of me, trying to fit it into the same old framework where I was still, somehow manageable. That night, lying in bed, I replayed Christmas dinner in my head. The laugh, the silence, the shift. Power doesn't always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it just changes the way people speak to you the next morning. And I realized something that unsettled me more than Kyle's mockery ever had. They didn't respect me because I was their mother. They respected me because I was successful. And that kind of respect is conditional. A few days later, Melissa called again. "Kyle's been stressed," she said. "Work's been unstable. The company might be restructuring." I listened without responding. "I just thought you should know," she added. In case we all need to be there for each other." There it was. Not an ask, a forecast. I ended the call politely and sat in the quiet afterward. My coffee long gone cold. Success hadn't changed who I was, but it had revealed who they were. And for the first time, I understood that the real test wasn't Christmas dinner. It was what came next when admiration turned into expectation. And respect started asking for something in return. They waited 3 weeks. Long enough for pride to soften, short enough for fear to take over. Melissa showed up at my door on a Tuesday morning. Eyes red, hair pulled back like she hadn't slept. She didn't bring Kyle. That told me everything. I didn't. "Nowhere else to go," she said. I stepped aside and let her in. She sat at the kitchen table, the way she used to when she was a teenager, hands folded, shoulders tense, bracing for bad news. I poured coffee. Not because she asked, because it gave her something to hold. "Kyle lost his job," she said finally. I nodded. I'd been expecting it. The way she'd mentioned restructuring, the way Kyle's voice had sharpened lately, brittle around the edges. When I asked 2 days ago, I waited. "The severance isn't much," she continued, "and things are tight." Tight. A careful word. One designed not to scare me. She didn't say we're drowning, just she didn't say we didn't plan for this. She didn't say we assumed you'd help. But all of it was there, hovering in the space between us. "I hate asking," she said, and this time her voice cracked. "But we need help. Just until Kyle finds something else. Just until." I leaned back in my chair and looked at Harili. Looked. My daughter. Older than I remembered. Younger than she wanted to be. "How much?" I asked. She hesitated. Then named a number that told me they hadn't just been careless, they'd been confident. Someone else would catch them. I thought about Christmas. Dinner. About the laugh. About how easily I'd been dismissed. And then I thought about Melissa at 16, crying over a broken heart, trusting me to fix it. "I can help," I said slowly. Her shoulders sagged with relief. "But not the way you're asking." She looked up, confused. I explained calmly. "No anger. No lecture. I would help with essentials. I not fund their lifestyle. There would be conditions. Budget. counseling, cutbacks, accountability. Kyle didn't take it well. He called later, voice tight with frustration. You're acting like this is our fault. This situation is unfortunate, I replied. How you handle it is a choice. He accused me of being cold, of holding money over them, of changing now that I'd made it. I didn't argue. I simply said, if I fix this for you, nothing changes. If you fix it yourselves, with support you might. There was silence on the other. And they accepted my terms. Not gratefully, not happily, but they accepted. After I hung up, I sat alone in my kitchen for a long time. My hands were shaking now. Not from fear, from restraint. It would have been so easy to write a check and make the discomfort disappear. To be the hero. To be loved again, but love that depends on rescue isn't love. It's dependency. And I'd spent too many years shrinking myself to be useful. This time, I chose something harder. I chose respect. Even if it took time for them to understand what that really meant. Asterisk. The first month was the hardest. Kyle took whatever work he could find. Not the kind he bragged about at dinner parties. Not the kind that came with titles or bonuses. Work that left him exhausted and quiet in the evenings. Melissa learned how to stretch meals. How to say no to things she once said yes to without thinking. The children adjusted faster than either of them expected. Children always do. They complained less than Kyle did. I stayed consistent. I didn't call every day. I didn't ask for updates. I didn't offer more than I'd already promised. That I learned was the most difficult part for them when people are used to being rescued. Silence feels like abandonment. Kyle called one evening, voice tight but controlled. We're managing, he said. Not asking, informing. That's good, I replied. A week later, Melissa came over alone. She looked tired but different, grounded somehow. I didn't realize how much we were relying on you without admitting it, she said quietly. Not just financially, emotionally. I nodded. Let her speak. We thought we were protecting you, she continued. But I think we were protecting ourselves from growing up. That was the closest thing to an apology I'd ever heard from her. Time passed. Kyle stopped complaining. Started planning. He didn't like the work, but he respected it. That was new. They didn't ask for more money. That surprised me. Then one afternoon, months later, Kyle showed up at my door with an envelope. Inside was the check I'd written them. Uncashed, we didn't use it. He said, not meeting my eyes. Knowing it was there was enough. I looked at the check for a long moment. You learned, I said. He nodded. We did. That was when I knew the power had shifted, not because I had money, but because I hadn't used it to control them the following Christmas. Dinner was different. Kyle listened more than he spoke. Melissa asked questions and waited for the answers, no. One laughed when I talked about my work. When I left that night, Melissa hugged me longer than usual. I see you now, she said, and I believed her as I drove home. I thought about how close I'd come to shrinking myself again just to keep the peace. How easy it would have been to buy approval, but respect earned quietly lasts longer than praise bought loudly. I unlocked my front door, stepped into my quiet house, and felt something settle over me. Not victory. Balance. Victory. Balance.